Mark Smalley, also known as the ancient IT philosopher, helps IT people understand service. People collaborate with Mark to discover where they are and to visualize where they want to be. Mark is a writer and coach at smalley.it and has contributed to the professional development of IT service management in more than 30 countries. It is my pleasure to have Mark today as our new guest in the Value Stream podcast. Let's start. Mark, how are you today?
Very, very well. Thank you very much. Good to see you again, David.
Yeah, that's my pleasure. And once again, thank you for having accepted my invitation to this podcast.
Pleasure. So what are we going to talk about? Because you said it was going to be a surprise. You've got some surprise questions for me.
Oh, yeah, it's true. I didn't send you this question in advance. And as you know, the podcast is called Value Stream podcast. So it means we will talk about value and we will talk about value derived from services, from IT services. And my questions will be related to that. So that means to value, generally speaking, to management of value and all these things, because many things have been already told in the field of service management. And I truly believe that many things have to be discovered or maybe formalized in terms of value management. So my questions will be about that. And as you are so knowledgeable, you have written, how many books did you written, by the way, in your career?
Well,
Or
it depends how you count. I think I can say that I own 7 books in terms of, they're my babies, and I've contributed to several other books as well. I think I've got 13 with my name somewhere on it.
wow.
And always about boring IT stuff.
I think that IT is all except the boring thing. And thanks to people like you, it is less and less boring. Okay, let's start with this. The value. I have a question. Let's start with one of my favorites. And sometimes I ask this question to the previous guest I had in this podcast. Is if we compare, let's compare value to electricity. Is value like electricity? Because electricity, you can create it, you can distribute electricity, it can be an issue to store it. What is your view of that? If you had to compare value from
Yeah,
services to
yeah,
electricity, what would be your view on that?
yeah. I haven't thought about this before, but I have done in terms of energy, thinking of value in terms of, again, talking about a value stream where something starts somewhere and that thing finishes somewhere else. We
Yeah.
could talk about where it starts and where it finishes as well. That's another
Yes.
interesting topic of discussion. But somewhere at the start, somebody comes up with an idea that they can probably either save money or make money by doing something that represents the value, at least the monetary value of something. And say, for instance, they come up with a business case. They say, we're going to invest $1 million, million euros in something, and we are going to get a payback of 500,000 a year from this investment. So the value is 500,000 a year.
Mhm.
So, but you haven't got that 500,000 a year yet. That's just what you want. So that's the potential value, the potential energy. So in a sense, there's energy potential, electricity potential. That's a
Yeah.
that's a, that's that's a term, a concept in electricity. And then on the way through the value stream, things happen. And at the end, hopefully, that potential of 500,000 a year will be realized when somebody makes use of whatever has been produced and provided to the user. But it's only when and this is something we could talk about, it's only when electricity is actually used that somebody gets any benefit out of it. So you can plug your hair dryer into the, by the way, a hair dryer is a very poor example for the two of us. You could plug a hair dryer into the socket and you could be using electricity, But until you've used it to make your hair dry, then absolutely no value has been realized.
Exactly.
But an interesting thing about value and comparing it to electricity or comparing it to energy in general is that leakage can occur on the way. That potential of 500,000 could. I'm going to make a bold statement. I'd say there's nothing in the value stream that would actually add to that 500,000. The only thing that can happen is that something goes wrong. Either things will be delayed, so you get the 500,000 not this year but next year, the first 500,000, or defects can occur, which cost you more money, and even at the end of the chain, when people are using the hairdryer, for instance, if they're using the hairdryer incorrectly, you've made a perfect hairdryer, you've sold it to them, so you've got the money from it. So in a sense, it's you got the money from it, so it's made value. But if it doesn't give value to the end consumer, they're not going to buy anything in the future. So you've sort of lost future. But the key point is it's only at the end of the chain when somebody actually benefit from whatever you've made, that is the place where value gets generated.
That's very interesting. So in other words, it means that by the time we build the business case, we know that it can only represent the maximum possible value we can expect.
Yeah, and of course, when you're doing the business case, you take into consideration how good, if we're talking about IT, how good is the IT department? How many defects do they usually build in IT systems? How much overrun in planning? How much overrun do they usually? So you build this into your expectation. You say, well, taking into consideration how well or how poorly our IT function works, the profit is going to be 500,000 a year.
Yeah.
And you could be lucky. Maybe they could perform better than usual. Then you maybe get a bit more than 500,000 a year. But it's that's so it is a very sobering thought for the IT department that they can't actually add much to the initial business case. They can only prevent things from going wrong. And there was a Dutch computer scientist, probably the most famous Dutch computer scientist, Dijkstra, in the 70s and 80s. He had wonderful quotes, and one of them was, and it's still true, computing's core challenge is how not to make a mess of it.
Yes.
Computing's core challenge is how not to make a mess of it. I think that's so true.
Oh yeah, I think that's something I will emphasize as one of the quote I will extract from this podcast.
Yeah,
That's right. That's right.
It's a classic,
Yeah.
and this is the guy who won the Turing Prize. He was. People say that he's the guy who invented structured programming.
Mm-hmm.
Such a great thinker.
Yeah,
And just as a slight sidebar in the conversation, he had the habit, we would now call them blogs or posts. He had the habit of writing blogs by hand, and he numbered them with the initials of his name, EWD, and a number behind it. And somebody at Texas University has digitized it, so all of these writings are archived, and they make fascinating reading. Really, really great stuff. Even 40 years, 50 years further down the road, still. He also talks about the humble programmer who is aware of his humanity. People aren't perfect; they make errors.
Oh yes.
Anyway, that was the first question.
No, but I think it's good because that's also all that is related to the assumptions we can make, and you make a lot of assumptions in a business case. Also, you are talking about expectations, and when you talk about expectations, once you have this service up and running, and then when it is delivered, that's also where we can detect the real expectations or compare maybe the expectations of the users or the consumer of a service with, in fact, what you deliver to them. Because that's another assumption, is by the time you define what they want you design the service and so on, you make also a kind of assumptions on expectations, and all these expectations are part of the service experience. What is for you the what would be an easy or a simple definition, if possible, of a service experience?
Yeah, no, I've written about this so many times. I'm trying to think of which one. Maybe I should just step back a bit. The most simple definition of it boils down to what you to. Firstly, it's subjective, it's
Okay,
individual.
okay.
If you look at the service science theory that academics have worked on, they use a wonderful word which is phenomenological. Phenomenological. About a phenomena, about some, so it's about what an individual experiences, and it translates into what I think about the service and how I feel about it. Subjective thoughts, judgments and feelings about the service. And in the end, it's not what the service has actually done in real life, if real life exists. It's how I feel about it that will determine my behavior. For instance, whether if you're a supplier and I'm a consumer, whether I buy from you again won't be based on what you've actually done, but how I have perceived it. And the difficult thing is, if I had a bad night last night, so I woke up tired, or I'm hungry or angry, then that's completely out of your circle of control. You can't do anything about it. But that will influence how I perceive your service. Sorry, it's just, that's life. Life sucks. Get used to it. Which makes it extremely hard for service providers to, the terminology is to stage an experience, no, create an experience, stage an experience. You're trying to think what kind of an experience with intent, to have intent to stage the kind of experience that you think your users would like, your consumers would like to have. That's what you try and do.
So I think it's a very good definition, very rich definition. You have a lot of concept in it. I like the idea of this staging, of having to stage experience. And how do you think that, because many organizations when they deliver services have a kind of standardized approach, of course, from their point of view. The idea of a perspective. They see their perspective of the service. They don't see the perspective, the view of the consumer on the service, which is not a mistake, but many organizations, they try to standardize the way for different reasons, financial reasons, technical reasons, organization reasons, and so on. And at the end of the day, they perceive the service in a way that is sometimes very different from the perception of the service consumers. Do you think that this is where the organization should place their energy if they want to become more valuable for their consumer? I mean, to bear in mind in a more systematic way the consumer perspective when they design, implement, and deliver a service?
Yeah, it depends. It depends. It depends very much on how the organization wants to position itself. So the strategic positioning in the marketplace. What kind of, and it's an interesting topic. What kind of a company do they want to be? Are they a friendly company? Are they an authoritative company? Are they a reassuring company? So you could almost say the identity. What are they, a caring company? Are they cheap? Are they efficient? You come up with various characteristics, but the idea is to think about with intent to consciously think about what kind of a company do we want to be, which will probably make you attractive to part of the market, but not to another part of the market. So that's difficult because you're choosing. You say, if you want to be like this, you want to attract these customers, then you're saying, sorry, it's not for you. And that's difficult for people to say. So what people often do is say, and I had this recently at a trade show, the SITS trade show in London. My industry colleague Stuart Rance and I visited Stuart visited lots of vendors and asked them a simple question: how do you differ from your competitors, so that I understand when I can advise your propositions rather than other people's. And the vendors found it extremely difficult to be specific. They say, we do everything for everybody, and we have artificial intelligence as well.
Yes.
There's the automatic add-on. And people find it difficult to focus on. But if you have decided that being a caring kind of company is part of your identity, so you are attracting consumers who are sensitive to those kind of things, then in that case, it makes sense to invest quite a lot in the kind of experience that you want to deliver. If you say, we don't really care, we just do our stuff, we make good products, we're pretty competitive, and we've got plenty of customers, then maybe it makes sense. It's a perfectly legitimate choice to say, we'll treat our customers just as numbers, and they're happy with that because they pay. It's like when you buy something on Amazon or on another site, sort by price. So you sort by price, you get the cheapest up the top. You look at the ratings, look at the reviews. If they're pretty good, if they're okay, you buy them because they're cheap. So the question is, what's your strategically differentiating characteristic? And if it's caring about people, then then it's justifiable to invest in experience.
Yes, that's a very good point. This one, last one, when you said that sort by price, because also what we saw is that even though organizations, or let's say consumers, will like let's say in organizations, we can take the example of purchasing departments, where purchasing department try to find the cheapest provider always. They are incented to that. But for instance, when we see what happened with this massive outsourcing, strategy, for instance, I mean the offshore strategy, looking at how much a programmer costs you in this or in this country. So it was really sorted by price. Okay, but even though this company wanted to find the cheapest provider, they also expected that the quality they can get from these people will be the same as if they remain, with a local provider. So in that case, even though we say sort by price, we come back to in the equation to the importance of the expectations, because even though they say, okay, we will find the cheapest one, but we still expect that there will be no, outage or worst quality of services. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, true. Because so many parties are involved. If you've got a procurement department and the department that actually wants the service, their assumptions, their incentives differ. So it's very much about, people have certain assumptions about assumptions, expectations. Of course, they do their best to translate their expectations, their needs, into formal requirements. They try and communicate the requirements to the provider. The provider does its best to understand the requirements. But even then, there's still a gap. It's so difficult to formalize, to codify what you want, and in the meantime, things will have changed anyway.
Yeah.
So, it's a question of making not just reducing the gap. You can't eliminate the gap. You've just got to reduce it as much as possible. And I think a key point is coming to a mutual understanding that there will be a gap, there will be misunderstandings, and how do we deal with them?
Yeah.
So instead of pretending that things are black and white, say, there will be a grey area, and when a grey area occurs, how will we deal with that?
Yeah, yes. And that's also the so now we were exploring the service expense, and maybe it's obvious questions. I don't know. You will be the judge of that. But how would you relate service expense and creation or management of value in an organization? How does it relate? Or I mean, many organizations now are talking about, and you wrote book on that, on XLAs, on expense level management. How do you relate that? So do we need to master service experience to get or to diminish to the minimum the value leakage, or what is the relationship between value and experience?
The first thing that comes to mind is that organizations, you're usually talking about the IT service management part
Yes.
of the value chain when you
Yes.
get down to that end. IT service management organizations have often used rather technical ways of defining the quality of their service in terms of the process, the output that they provide, the tangible output. Whereas in XLA thinking, it extends output into outcome. So what do people do with the output? And you could divide that into two parts. You could say it's both the business impact that the output has on the customer's business processes, and it's the human experience that people have of the output and the outcome and the process and the relationship. And that's when you start diving into how people experience things, it's not only the transaction that we are having at the moment, for instance, it's what happened beforehand. It's the whole history of if you've done a great job in the past and you foul up just once, then I'll forgive you. But if you've continually been fouling up, you've been providing poor service, and you do it again, then I hate you. So
Yeah.
it's very contextual and
Oh yeah.
very difficult to manage. But in the end, this is the tough part. In the end, it's the customer who is going to decide on very emotional, irrational grounds whether he's going to renew the contract with you.
Yeah, I agree with you.
And it's you've probably seen the analogy with the watermelon, which is green on
Yeah.
the outside, representing the green color on a dashboard. Everything's great, but when you go dive into the inside, it's red. And people say, it's green. The dashboard is great, completely ignoring the human
Yeah.
experience that somebody's really fed up with you.
That's why yesterday when I heard people from Bright Horse in their podcast on experience management, they were they compared the watermelon with growing lime, which will be in fact green
Yeah, green on the
outside
outside, green
and
on the
inside.
inside.
So
Yeah,
so in
yeah,
fact that's what you need to do instead of growing watermelon. You have to growing limes, which it's easy to say.
yeah.
And by the way, when we say that, when I like what you said about this, when you said the expense, and how you can help from the output the outcomes in terms of activities of business processes, but
Mm.
also the human experience. If we focus on this first part, for instance, many or quite a few service providers care about that. I mean, we are in a relationship where they deliver services, they have SLAs, they get paid for that, and satisfied customer because they keep their promises. On the other hand, the customer itself doesn't really monitor what are the real outcomes he gets from using the services. So the question in that case is, does the service provider, according to you, have to measure for the customer the real outcomes that are, measurable from the use of the services, or does it have to be done by the consumer?
Yeah, I'd say my gut reaction is to say that that's the consumer's concern. Probably depends whether you're talking about users within a single organization or whether it's a distinct commercial entity you're selling to another company.
Yeah,
So in the first case, you're in the same boat. You've got the common concern, whereas with the other one, you've just got the commercial relationship. What does help, I had this personally, this goes way back in my career when I actually did something useful instead of just talking about it. A customer shared with us, and it was a logistics company. We provided the IT, we did the maintenance of the IT system that supported their activities, the logistics. And he shared every month that we would talk about our services. He'd talk about the number of incoming order, the number of incoming orders, number of outgoing orders, and the number of logistic movements. These were three. He had three key variables. And what he did, and it's really insightful for us, he said, if I look at my factory, my business, these three things, they indicate how busy we are. If I compare with our busyness with the bill that you sent me for our work, then I would like to see some kind of correspondence between if we're busy, it's going to cost more. And if we're not so busy, it's going to cost less because we were also responsible for the production. So
yeah,
the compute and the data storage and stuff like that. And of course, we couldn't do anything about that.
yeah,
But it was, if you think about you probably have heard of the circles of control, influence, and concern.
yeah,
Stephen Covey made them quite popular. They go back to the ancient Greeks. Epictetus, I think, was the guy who first came up with the concept, but Stephen Covey made it popular. That activity in the company that is completely out of certainly is not in our circle of control, is not in our circle of influence, but it is in our circle of concern, because we are concerned, at least if we care about the customer, then we want to know what's happening so
yeah.
that we can do our best indirectly to contribute to that, to those outcomes.
Oh, that's very interesting, and that may be also that lead to another question I have, which will be almost one of the last. I would like to talk to you for a longer time, but because I don't want people to get frustrated about my French accent, and I want them to be delighted about your British one. So my last question would be about, you mentioned that this different, let's say, sphere of control, influence, and concern. That makes me think about where to start and where to stop when we were talking about value management. You touched that at the beginning,
Mm,
when we
mm.
were talking about this energy stuff. So, because I have the feeling, and when I look at, for instance, value stream management, that the borders are clear. So, for instance, for them, if I don't make any mistake, we know that in fact for value streams we mainly focus on all these I would say step up to the deployment of a new or modified services into production. Okay, so all these development and I would say build, test, and deployment phases of a service. But to my mind, I think that value management, and you say about the concern, the story continues when we use the services. So what is your view on that? What would how we could say how we could set up, if it makes sense, to set some frontiers like that.
Yeah, this is a really tricky topic. I've struggled with this, with the demarcation of value streams for quite a while. Where does a value stream start? When does it
Yes.
stop? If you're in the IT business, it's very convenient to say the value stream stops when we have delivered the service, made it available to the customer, we're done. And of
Yeah.
course, we give our support, but that's where it stops. Where does it start? When we get the requirements or the request to do something. But if you think about it, before we've got the requirements for something, business people have probably thought about what they want, possibly for months or years. You know, maybe we should do this sometime. So 1.5 years ago, somebody came up with an idea. What about this investment? Nah, it costs too much, not the right time. So they let it sleep for a while and they'd think about it. They discuss it internally. That, in a sense, that is the prequel to the value stream. Now, should that be part of the value stream as well? And on the other end, we can say we've delivered the service, but until the user has actually used the information systems that we've provided, so using the systems effectively, do they understand the functionality? Do they know what functionality is in the system? Until they've done that, until they've interpreted the information, the digitized information that they got out of the system. So now they've got information. Do they actually understand the information? What does it mean? Until they've used that digitized information to take a business decision on a business action, I'll take it just a step further and then I'll stop. Until they've actually acted on that decision that was improved by information that they got out of using the system that we provided with a value stream, only then have they actually got value out of it. So,
Well, yeah.
help. Now, and what I did in my late on the this is my
Yes.
latest book.
Yeah.
Conveniently, on the back of my latest book, I have described in 9 steps. You give the link to the
Yes,
audience,
please.
then they can look at the back of the book for free on Amazon, or buy it. Please buy the book.
Yes, please.
Where I take that very broad definition of service. Where does it start? Where does it end? And what I say is, guys, this is the whole thing. Decide for yourself which part is your responsibility, because in the end, someone as an individual, a manager in a company, will be responsible for part of a value stream or all of a value stream. So that, that's their circle of control and maybe influence. But it's such a tricky topic. This really, I've had so many sleepless nights thinking about how do you approach this topic.
Yeah, but that's we have something in common in that case. I would say I sleep well. That's what upset my wife. I always sleep well. I always sleep at least 8 hours a day, but I always sleep well. Nothing can prevent me from having a nice sleep. So that's the difference. But we have something in common. I'm really obsessed about this question: where to start, where to stop, and can we say that value management of value is limited to management of value streams? Is there something else? It's an open question, maybe for another podcast with you, Mark, because it was my pleasure to have you
Yeah.
today.
Yeah, well, I think that just to round it off, you may remember I used to call myself the IT paradigmologist,
Yes.
somebody who studies IT paradigms, studies ways of looking at IT. But I've recently changed my identity. I now self-identify as an ancient IT philosopher. And the ancient is obvious. I'm at the wrong end of my career, or the right end, depending on how you look at it. Um,
Yeah.
but the idea of philosophy, which is about asking questions, and I'm increasingly valuing questions more than answers. And I think this is possibly something that we could share with the audience. It's probably more valuable for you to think about the question yourself than to rely on answers that we might give. Give people questions to think about. I think that's a good thing. And just a final thought is, if answers are the sequel to questions, what is the prequel to a question? So where do questions come from? So there's a philosophical thought for us to end on.
Yeah, thank you for
Where
that.
questions come from?
Yeah, that's a very deep question on questions. I like this. I think it makes me now think for the rest of my not career, but at least for a long time. And I really wanted to thank you for being my guest today, Mark. Once again, it was a real pleasure to have you in this podcast. And I am very happy that you could answer my question today, that you could be here for us. Once again, before we finish, I have a couple of things that I would like to ask you. What is the best way for our listeners to get in touch with you? What is the best way for people to ask you questions or think about or give you feedback on all the concept and I would say the work you produce?
On LinkedIn.
Okay, good.
Feel free to send me a connection request on LinkedIn, and feel free to take a look at the articles that I've posted on LinkedIn, because many of them are about the kind of questions, kind of topics that we've talked about in the podcast.
Yes, thank you. And I will make sure that there is a link or other links to your publications, because I deeply recommend our listeners to read them, and they will feel really wiser. And of course, they will get a lot of things that they can use in their own organizations or for their own purpose. So thank you for that. Once again, thank you, Mark, for being my guest today. And that's it. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah, great pleasure.